So Seth, what compelled you to write the Merlin Advantage?
Well, some people might get the idea that it was from watching too many Lord of the Rings movies or something,
Okay.
but actually, it was my own workplace experiences over time, and then later. I won't tell the whole story, but later in my master's program, where I focused on management and leadership and my own leadership experiences, all of this sort of just was coalescing over the years around what I was observing and reading about human suffering that was created by these oppressive workplace systems, kind of maybe archaic systems from scientific management, industrial revolution holdovers and stuff like that. And I was like, man, it's still here, it's still going on. And I felt it myself. I've talked to friends and family who've gone through kind of hellish scenarios, and yet the monster moves on, and with leadership development money, and time and energy just being thrown all over the place to sort of try to correct this human suffering problem. To what I was seeing is to little avail. Like, it just
Right.
wasn't making that much impact. And then my book idea came as I sort of started to see it sort of dawned on me as I'd put things side by side, literally on my desk, of some of what I was seeing in personality, and even some new neuroscience implications. I was starting to see, like, wait a second. And here was the aha moment
Right.
for the Merlin Advantage.
hmm
Was some of what I was seeing as in these command and control structures, if you will, or whatever, traditional systems. I was like, there are personality types that are more often promoted into leadership positions. They're the high potentials. They're the type A's, the hard drivers, whatever, that I talked about, coming from competitive energy and getting promoted into leadership, that aligned with this sort of control-based, very technical, I say quantitative oriented, kind of system. And then I noticed on the other side, as you know, there's a whole bunch of people that flow with much more intuition around empathy and reflection and dialogue and emotion and all that kind of stuff, which was aligning with what people were trying to push in leadership development programs. So much emotional intelligence, positive psychology, all these kind of things. And I was like, wait a second, there's something here.
hmm
And I started to then that's where we get into the Merlin stuff. I was like, there's movies, there's stories, there's real life examples where we have these rulers, kings, queens, whatever, royals, whatever, these people in positions of influence and power who've gotten there largely out of successfully navigating competitive energy. And then they have these helpers,
hmm
that seem to help them navigate the human side, or the nuanced gray area of being a ruler and having subjects or whatever, or having villains or whatever. And that's what, off I went. I went into that journey and followed it out till I got to the Merlin Advantage, and that's where we landed.
Yeah. And you make it pretty clear at the beginning, like the Merlin is more often could be like shamanistic with introverted intuition. And that's kind of where you bring Jung in, where it's like, it's insights from all the data you've collected. Because you mentioned, like, I had been seeing this over a long period of time, and I started to kind of figure out, like, what we can do about this in a way that's not discounting the classic, you call it performance leadership,
Right.
saying that this performance leader, king, queen, monarch, can still reign with a Merlin-esque insightful type that's not focused on the quote technical aspects or the KPIs or the quota or the bottom line, but you can still achieve it with this emotional intelligence, sort of non-polished, which is, I love your term, like, the not excessively polished type of
Yeah.
personality that
Yeah.
can successfully be integrated into that the performance leadership. And you have a term, you call them, there's PLs, performance leaders, and there's IPLs, there's integral process leader.
Yeah.
So the concept of the Merlin, or the concept of the integral process leader, what do they do for an organization?
That's the operative question.
Yeah.
People are like, we know how to run these organizations. We know how to get stuff done. And to some extent, we think we know how to deal with people. But I take it a step farther, and I go into that controversial territory or provocative territory that says, not everybody's good at everything. And, for some people, that seems pretty self-evident.
Right.
You and I know there's others who really continue to, maintain that notion that we can all be good at everything if we just work hard enough or spend enough money on leadership development. And I challenge that, and I say, hey, you've got some King Arthurs, or queens, whatever. It's not gender based.
Right.
Those are the characters I often go to. But
Right.
I pull in Mary Poppins
Yep.
and others. There are these people that are taking care of what we'd consider the business side, the operational side, the supply chain side, the technical side, the innovation side, all that stuff. And as you pointed out, critical. Like, the world doesn't go on without performance leadership. And so this is not a knock on that more hard driven side.
Right.
At all. In fact, I enjoy the world that's been created by these folks. But then we look at some of the statistics, and I cite these of the human suffering. People struggle with their bosses and toxic leadership, and even true, psychopathology happening at some levels. So along the spectrum of damage being inflicted on people, and disrupted dinner times, from disrupted dinner times to people jumping off buildings, and experiencing real human suffering. I'm like, I got to tell you from my research, and this is what shows in the book, there's other types of leaders who are competent and deep and rooted in what you're talking about, which is, however you want to slice it, MBTI or other systems. They come from a different space, and they excel elegantly and innately in brainstorming, listening to negative information or contradictory information, or a more patient discovery process, not needing bullet points, not always needing sequence, but operating much more comfortably in gray area with different more time passing. And the performance leaders are like, we don't have that kind of time. We got to get to the bottom line. What's the deal? Everybody needs to get with the program, which in my book, I continue to try to say, yeah, that's true. And we also need this other side, kind of moving in and through the system. This is where I get into that oil in the car analogy. There's these performance engines, if you will, race cars, sports cars, and they're awesome. And you don't go anywhere without them. But IPL, integral process leaders, provide that oil that reduces, literally the analogy, I don't know if it could be better, it reduces friction. Mm-hmm. And this is what we experience in organizations, that interpersonal friction, which turns into suffering, because that oil is a whole different thing that other people, different folks, and so what do they actually do? They're doing the coaching, they're doing the mentoring, they're sitting down in mediation, they're providing some of the EQ training, they're sitting in on contentious meetings, and they're providing a different, this is where I talk about cooperative energy. They're just injecting cooperative energy across the organization in all kinds of real-time daily ways. And very much like the oil, it's just coursing through the engine every day while it drives around super fast and accomplishes all kinds of goals, only because the oil's keeping the temperature, the internal temperature and smoothness, at a certain level.
Yeah, and you start out the book talking about cholesterol and the silent killer, and it's not that organizations suffer or die from like getting shot with a shotgun. It's like a very slow death, and what they do, and everyone that's worked in a corporation could see it, even if they really like their job, is there's sort of a internal marketing campaign of public relations and good culture and things that make people feel good, but like there's a death by 1,000 cuts type of mentality where you can see the performance leadership slowly eroding away at people's joy, but it could take a decade before it finally hits that point. So what is the vicious cycle that we see when we exclusively focus on performance leadership as a means to an end?
Well, you hit it. It creates a deficit, just by nature. It's like saying, what if we continue to drive around the track without a pit stop or, stopping for oil?
Right.
I think everybody knows what happens. And that's organizational cholesterol. Like you said, I think I say in the book, it's not that one cheeseburger that
Right.
gets you where all of a sudden it's like a bullet to the head and you're dead from organizational cholesterol. No, it's just over time, Machiavellian tactics start to become the norm. Passive aggression becomes the norm. Cliques form.
Mm-hmm.
Certain cultural mutations of stuff we don't say around here, but nobody knew that we don't say it, but we kind of picked up that we don't say it, or you're dead. And it becomes a fear-based culture. This is where IPL is such a boost for psychological safety, because it gets in the way of that cultural disintegration or whatever, that calcification I think
Yeah.
I talk about, that gets so nasty. And it's hard because you can't put a finger on it. Just like cholesterol, you don't feel it acting up like, oh geez, I feel a little cholesterol.
Yeah.
No, sadly you don't feel it in many cases, and especially sometimes performance leaders who haven't really taken a journey into the emotional human-centered approaches. They're completely oblivious. They do not have their cholesterol checked, and they're letting people go, and they're stuffing, smashing down negative information and doing all these kind of things where the information's not getting to them, and yet the calcification is occurring. And
Yeah.
it's deadly. I mean, you look at the stats of engagement or turnover or, retraining or whatever metric you want to pick. It's bad. It's expensive.
Just reminded me of a show that I love. Have you ever seen Parks and Rec?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the perfect example, as you were talking, is when Ben Wyatt and Chris Traeger come in. So it's Rob Lowe and I forgot the other character's name, but Rob Lowe is the IPL,
Okay.
human-centered, positive energy, and Ben is the slash and cut and burn and no personality. It's like that's actually a really good example of like this is how they finally figure out how to work together. Like Rob gives the message, Rob Lowe gives a message, even if it's negative, but it's Ben behind him, like kind of making the hard decisions. So it's like we can work together, and they do. So
Yeah.
maybe that's an extreme example of IPL and PL, or integral process leader and performance leader.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great one. And sadly, there are in real life and plenty of in our sitcoms, there are some really dramatic examples of the person who's just vicious on the bottom line and ruthless and all that kind of stuff. I think there's also lots of cases, many cases. I work with lots of performance leaders that are awesome. They're people, they're charismatic, they're fun, and they really do want to create systems that are, we talk about tangible benefit from everyone. One of my strategic partners that I work on a project with is always like wanting the win-win for people. And he knows this is the stuff. But what happens is, like you say, when it comes to a meeting, there's a sense of impatience. When it comes to problem solving, there's an acute fear of disloyalty, or I can't unhear that, or what does that mean? When it's brainstorming time, I've worked with performance leaders who just simply say, Seth, you take them through the brainstorming. I'm going to go, I'm going to go hit the cafeteria or hit the greens, or, one of them was like, I literally said, I'm going to go ride my horse for a while. Okay. And then I'm going to come back and see where you guys are feeling on this. I have some ideas and we'll slap them together, and I'll be back in an hour and a half. And we just started to have this comfortable rhythm of like, I'll take them through the gray and the emotional processing and the places where people feel fear and resistance. Because for me, I'll reveal that I'm more on the IPL side. I'm an INFJ. I'm an introverted intuitive. And for me, my experience of those things is more exciting. I'm kind of intrigued by it, and I like it. I like to listen, and I like to get into the nuance of things. And my performance leader friends are like, dude, have that all day long. I'll just check in with you later. And it works. We in those cases where we've worked in this PL, IPL rhythm, we have a lot of fun and people stay really happy. So
that's excellent. So, Seth, we're going to have to let you go, but it's not personal. It's just business. Are we going to put this phrase to bed finally? Or that's a good analogy phrase for other phrases and memes that get brought up in corporate leadership. So what are we supposed to do about this sort of, hey, you know what? I know your life is, completely going to be ruined now by this decision, but it's not personal.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm glad you picked up on that. That was one of my favorite ones to tackle in the book. And it is, I mean, just to be clear for folks, it's that literal commitment that almost that it's virtue to tell someone that you're breaking up with or firing or whatever, that it's not personal. And people struggle to feel better, like, oh, thanks, cool. And I say in the book, it's like a hitman on a movie. I'm thinking of John Cusack in Grosse Point Blank or something. He says something along the lines of, it's not personal. And, classically, hitmen say that in movies. And it's like, if you're about to shoot me, I don't feel any better that it's professional. I'm still going to die at your hands, and my person is going to be gone. And, so I tackled this with people saying, if you're talking to a person, it's personal.
Yeah.
It just is. And a lot of people say that, well, that's not what I mean, Seth. I mean, we got to separate business from, and I'm like, yeah, but that's a false dichotomy.
Right.
And I really challenge performance leaders. Like, I know you want it that way, because sometimes for, neurologically or personality wise or whatever this comes from, that human emotion terrain, it feels unstable. And so sometimes performance leaders will try to say it just isn't so. This is not emotional. And they're saying, this isn't personal, this isn't emotional, because I need it to not be. And the other person's like, I'm about to lose my income, lose my sense of self, my sense of purpose. I'm going to be in the unemployment lines. Mm-hmm. I got to tell my family this. How is this not personal? And the person on the other side of the table is often saying, well, it just isn't. We got some options for you or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's still personal.
It's still personal.
So we need a new phrase, like, hey, let's try to find the win-win here or whatever. People can have some fun with, what is the replacement phrase for it's not personal? Because I'm stridently saying it is.
Right. And I would agree. And maybe I should do a LinkedIn poll and see what people come up with. Because I'm sure this has been brought up and people have like, oh, here's what we say now. It's actually worked out a lot better.
Yeah.
I challenge the opposite thing to go, if you were to walk into your performance leader's office and say, not personal, but you're the worst boss I've ever had. Not personal. Right. Would they, how dare you, like, fire you instantly? Like, can we do that in reverse? And would your boss go, yes, you know what? That is fine. I am the worst leader you've ever had. That's okay. Yeah.
Right.
I hear you.
Yeah. Rarely. Yeah. Yeah.
Not at all. So feedback on your book from Amazon or wherever it's at. I mean, I did review it, and I think you had 7 or 8 reviews. So how's it going in terms of feedback?
Feedback is really good. I mean, it resonates with people. I mean, as you pointed out, the organizational cholesterol thing keeps coming up as like, feels right for people. It feels like something true for people. And the solution is incredibly attractive for people. I think the challenge that people have is like, this is a paradigm shift, and this is a new position, and this is offering help and allyship to people who don't necessarily think they need it, or would wonder what happens to my ability to fire people or control situations. And, there's a little bit of market education that goes on with this book project that I've found. After you write a book, it sort of starts to feel self-evident, but I found like people are like, well, how would that marriage work? Does it really work to have a Merlin or a Mary Poppins clanging around doing stuff? I'm like, well, I mean, if you watch the movies, it kind of helps. And as I've seen these real life scenarios unfold, it works, and it takes some time.
You give a couple solutions. Like first, you write out in terms of interviewing. How can you, you're like the 4 different types of archetypes that will interview for a role that's to be an IPL. One's like an imposter and one's I forgot the other one, but there's interview tactics you give to ask the right questions, which is great. And then there's like, how would the hierarchy look? So you kind of put 2 org charts, 2 or 3, and you say like, they would be like a dotted line for this person, or they would be in this sector, but off to the side. So those are the questions that I can tell it's like kind of your NI introvert intuition saying, I can already see where they're going to have problems here. I'm already to solve it ahead of time. Yeah. So I think that there is a lot of that. And so what are we going to do about it that you solve?
Right. Good. Well, I hope to. It's in there. If people can, if they can stand the journey into a conceptual future, um, a sort of ambiguous, imagined future where
Yeah.
they are running like this. Yeah, I do spell it out for people. I have seen it work. I provide in there the incident command system analogy, from firefighting and stuff, where you have similar structures already tested and widely used and adopted by FEMA or whoever.
Hmm.
And I just replace some of the words a little bit and help people understand how it's not. I think one of the gut level fears of people is that this is a pathway, this is a slippery slope to death by committee. That as a performance leader, I'm going to sit in a pit stop all day long. Every time you get a little mystic wizard, bee in your bonnet, we're going to be in a pit stop. And the commitment, when we train integral process leaders, the commitment is we don't do that. One of our rules is least amount of intervention necessary. We're not flagging down for pit stops unless, we really need it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's another good selling point where it's like there's not going to be too many committees. So that's like the worst thing a PL can hear. So
Right.
what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna post where people can get this book
Yeah. Dude.
in the comments. And then any other media where people can find you, they can follow you on LinkedIn, things like that, and on Twitter. Seth, I appreciate you coming on the show. I read the whole book. I highlighted 30 pages worth of it, so I really believe in it. I think people that have seen my channel and know what I do, I don't interview people that don't have either I endorse or don't have something interesting to say. So I'm really honored to have you on the show.
Well, thank you. I'm humbled to be in the conversation with you, and talking with you about it from your perspective has been a joy for me. So much appreciated.
Awesome. Talk to you soon, Seth.
All right. Thanks, Joe.